It is 10:30 exactly now. We have more participants joining, but I would like to start now. Dear panelists and distinguished participants, I warmly greet you all and welcome you to SHURA's Transportation Sector Transformation, Integration of Electric Vehicles into Turkey's Distribution Networks report launch and panel discussion. Today, we are here to discuss a critical issue for Turkey's energy transition and achieving its net zero targets. The transportation sector has a large share in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions and is therefore one of the most important areas for achieving sustainability goals. The main strategy for decarbonization of this sector is the electrification of the transportation sector to use clean electricity. Therefore, electric vehicles are at the center of this transformation and offer a great opportunity, both environmentally and economically. However, for this transformation to take place in a healthy way, our distribution networks need to adapt to these new technologies. The transportation sector represents 26% of total final energy consumption in Turkey, the second highest energy consuming sector after industry and buildings, and also the sector with the highest dependence on fossil fuels. The transportation sector is also responsible for around 22% of Turkey's CO2 emissions, of which more than 90% comes from the road transport. Therefore, the transition to electric mobility is very important to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, but it also offers many other opportunities, such as energy efficiency, contributing to the integration of more renewable energy into the system by providing flexibility to the grid. However, this requires some adjustments in both the distribution grid and market design. In this context, we think that it is very important to understand the benefits of smart charging mechanisms and to formulate policies accordingly. As SHURA Energy Transition Center, we published our first study on this topic in 2019. In this study, we worked on scenarios of 1 million and 2.5 million electric vehicles by 2030. And it showed us that by the year 2030, 2.5 million electric vehicles could be integrated to Turkey's distribution grid with almost no additional investment and limited impact on grid operation. It's not a long time, but the developments have been very quick. First of all, Turkey declined a net zero target, and therefore, if we want to achieve net zero target in the transportation sector, we have to decide on more assertive goals. And secondly, we see a very quick increase in the electric vehicles across the world, and new technologies are coming. Therefore, we felt the need to update and expand the scope of our 2019 study. And we used the assumptions from our study, Net Zero 2053, a roadmap for Turkey's electricity sector. And in this study, we analyzed the transformation needed in end-use sectors to achieve Turkey's net zero target. And there are more assertive scenarios for the transportation sector. Our report examines the role of controlled and smart charging solutions to mitigate additional investment requirements and grid impacts from e-mobility, and provides policy recommendations for the seamless integration of e-mobility loads into the Turkish electricity grids. We have many to thank. The study was prepared by our center with the EPRA Energy Consultancy, and also RAP, Regulatory Assistance Project, a global non-governmental organization working on energy transformation, also contributed to our study, especially on global practices. Enerjisa Group shared with us the transform the data of two distribution regions that form the basis of this project. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their cooperation and support. We also would like to thank our stakeholders from the public and private sectors, universities, and non-governmental organizations who shared their valuable views with us at the consultation meetings we organized through the project. We'll now first make a short presentation to convey the results of our report. Then we have four esteemed panelists, and with their contributions, we will have the opportunity to discuss the findings of this report in more depth and evaluate them from different perspectives. If you have any questions after the launch and panel, you can write to us in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer them as much as the time permits after the panel. And we have foreign participants with us today. Therefore, we will have simultaneous interpretation available in Turkish and English throughout the session. You can use the interpretation section in the lower right corner of the screen to use the interpretation function. It's also typed in the chat section. You can find further details there. Now I would like to give the floor to Hasan Aksoy, SHURA Research Coordinator, for introduction of the report. Thank you very much. I will now present our report without further ado. I think you can now see the report. Yes, we can. Actually, Alkım has already described. We have a very detailed analysis, and we added on top of our report from 2019 the impacts on the distribution grid and smart charging practices, and the policy recommendations, which could be a roadmap for Turkey, are given in this report. I would like to thank EPRA Energy for acting as a consultant. We carried out our analysis together, and REP also shared their policy recommendations, global practices with us. And also, I would like to extend my gratitude to Enerjisa for contributing to us with the real data. If it wasn't for their contributions, we could not have really come up with such a detailed report. It is a very extensive report indeed. I have done my best to fit it into 24 slides for you. And now I would like to talk about the transportation sector in Turkey. The transportation sector accounts for around 22% of Turkey's CO2 emissions, and it is accounting for 26% of the total energy consumption, and 90% is oil consumption, which is being imported into the country. Therefore, electricity is highly important for us in order to decrease the dependence, and road transport is highly important. Nearly 90% is stemming from the road transportation. As for the case in the world, you may see the number of electrical vehicles in different countries. Back then we had 16,000 in Turkey, now it is 90,000. And you can see China states with over millions of EVs. And in China, it's more than 15 million. And as for Turkey, we hear good news. The share of electrical vehicles in total number of cars sold is more than 10% as for the last year. In 2022, it was only 1%. And as for the total number of vehicles, it is still under 1%. And in countries like Norway, it is more than 30%. And the rate in total sales is more than 90% now. You will see the visuals for the charging sockets, and you may see that they are spread across Turkey now. Of course, they are more prevalent in the major cities, and this is very normal, and it's a parallel development with the internal combustion engines. As for our projection, Alkım has already mentioned, we have our net zero report in 2053. We would like to achieve net zero emission economy. And we have used the figures here. You will see it on the right-hand side. Net zero roadmap forecasts 11 million EVs by 2035. And by 2053, it goes up to 36 million. And the number actually aims to achieve a net zero. We wanted to base our study on this number because we wanted to see whether or not our grid is ready for that. And we have our base scenario as well. I'll share the details with you soon. And also, it is increasing very quickly across the world now. As for the number of charging sockets, it is 12,000, but we hear it has gone over 20,000 now. So what did we do in our analysis? We were based on two EV scenarios. SHURA net zero scenario, which is 11 million EVs in 2035, and the base case scenario, which is 5 million EVs. You may see in the lower right-hand corner, there are the EV projections of different public organizations. The Ministry of Industry and Technology forecasts 270,000 by 2025, and Energy Market Regulatory Authority forecasts 361. Of course, we don't know what we will see, but we want it to be based on the highest number so that we could see the impact on the distribution grids. In Aydaş, Başkent, Edaş regions, we decided on 4 different pilot regions. And we forecast the approximate number of EVs in these regions. We had 5 different charging categories, weekly and weekend, and different modelings from slow charging to fast charging. And we wanted to see the forecast of loads, and we created the reference grid model. And we calculated the investments, and we added EVs and light service vehicles on top of that, and analyzed the impacts on the grids. And we researched how to alleviate the load on the grid. You know these regions. Aydaş, başkent Adaş, and it accounts for 13% of the total energy consumption and 14% of total population. And we chose the metropolitan areas, and we chose Şile as the rural area. You may see further details in the report for sure. I'll just give you a summary of it. And the charging profiles during weekdays and weekends, and based on base scenario and the 11 million forecast. And we evaluated 5 different charging technologies from 2.3 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt. In our stakeholder meetings, we also received some comments like 100 kilowatt is not enough for DC. It will be 250 or 300, but we want it to be based on an average value. And we had different profiles. As for the demand side, how will it be moving? For the reference grid model, it is a very critical process. We took 3% rate as the average, but it differs from one region to another. Of course, Akköprü region, for example, increased by 5% in terms of electricity demands, while it is 2% for the other regions. Therefore, we decided on 5% for the rural and 3% for the metropolitan regions. So we assumed that it will increase to this amount by the year 2035. As for the capacity of the transformers, the capacity factor use is 40% in low voltage and medium voltage lines. And in the metropolitan areas, the capacity factors is 15%. While creating our reference scenario, we considered these amounts, and also we considered the investments that will meet these needs. And we decided that nearly 30 low voltage and medium voltage transformers are required. And 2.2% investment is required for the medium voltage lines. So that was the purpose, to create the reference model in order to meet the energy load. As for the distribution of the charging points, it's very critical. Shopping centers, parking lots, workplaces, and commercial premises, fuel stations were the locations for charging stations. We also added the lightweight service vehicles, and we did the grid analysis accordingly. One of the results from the grid analysis was that in the 2035, the transformer load went up to 52%, and in the net zero scenario with 11 million EVs, so it means 7% increase in base scenario, and it means 17% according to the net zero scenario.
When you're moving from the base scenario to net zero, the transformer loads are displaying significant increases, and this is due to the number of EVs, electric vehicles. And of course, we calculated the investments, and when we were calculating the investments, there were three investment items: low voltage, medium voltage, and low voltage LV, MV, transformer investments, and MV, line investments. So which factors are taken into account have been explained, and there's a detailed summary in the reports as well. The orange boxes that you see are about they concern the previous part as well. That is in the transformer, MV-LV transformer investments. They prevent the low voltage system, and also the continuity of the supplies also affect the MV-LV transformer investments. And this is how we calculated the investments. When we look at the results real fast, with the electric vehicles in the reference network model, in the reference grid model, the LV MV transformers, there there is an overload caused by EV that can be reduced with an average of 10% more investment in metropolitan areas, where with the compared to the reference grid model, with the absence of EVs, this will require an additional investment of 10%. For instance, in rural areas such as Şile transformer centers, the investment from electric vehicles are needed because the system is relatively small. That's why the investment needs to be higher in such areas. And from an investment standpoint, when you look at the middle voltage distribution lines, it is observed that there's an average of 16% more medium voltage line investment that would be needed in the metropolitan areas due to e-mobility, due to mileage. And when we look at the overall investment, when we look at the sum of all of these, in addition to the reference grid model, this would require, and this is only due to e-mobility, that's an additional investment need of 12%. And the distribution networks, of course, need to do these investments in order to ensure that the system operates soundly and to ensure reliability. And there are other issues, what's going to happen in special days, the week before the holiday weeks. And we made various case analysis, and we tried to look into this. There is this holiday week, and a normal week is compared in this report. On the left-hand side, which is a normal week, on a Saturday, that would be like 90% electric vehicle. The weekly consumption towards Thursday, it decreases, or perhaps during weekdays, at some other times, they can be charged. And on the right-hand side, assuming that Thursday is the start of the holiday, the Eid Mubarak, all of us, before we travel for the holiday, we want to have full charged electric vehicles before we go to journey. So on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, they will start charging their vehicles, or they will start making their storages full. So when we look at the EV load profile, it almost quadruples compared to the charge profile in a normal week, and the Wednesday before the religious holiday, it shows us that is an increase of 4 times compared due to the simultaneous charging load expected that day under normal conditions. And because of the loading at the transformers, you see on the graph uh, right before the public holiday and during the holiday, it is, whereas it's 47 under normal charge, it goes up to 96%, or it can go up to 200% at certain times. And both charging, when charging at home is supported, or when transformers feeding public charging points. In both scenarios, we see a significant transformer load. So how are we going to solve this? Because this is a very critical question. These areas can be invested in, and it's making investments only for holidays. It might not sound that rational because it's like 2, 3 days or 1 week, a year. Making irrational investments there may not be that logical. So in such times, another solution could be as follows. Smart charging or controlled charging practices could be a solution. For smart charging, this is not only used for holidays, we need to say this. And smart charging is actually, like you all know, it is when the grid and the market they are shifted to suitable hours. There is no charging when the grid is under load, and when the grid is more suitable, it is shifting the load to those hours. And on the days before the holidays, this could be sent to the with price signals. We can say if you load at these hours, if you charge at these hours, the prices will be more affordable. Or if you charge outside those hours, it will be higher. It's not only for holidays, but the operation of the market and the price situations might require this, particularly in the renewable energy regulations. The solar, when sun and wind are high, so if you can coincide the charging times with that, both for the sake of the grid and for the sake of the electricity market, and to ensure that the consumer reaches affordable electricity, this is very critical in our opinion. And how can we do this? We can do this with price signals, we can do this with temporal time tariffs, and we can also use aggregator mechanisms to aggregate the charge of the EVs and offer it to the markets. There are different methods, but smart charging is critical. And there's another issue, which was our study, one of the studies, vehicle to grid. These are the practices. In theory, both this would be helping both the low voltage line loading, and also it would help with the low voltage network grid profile, voltage profile. So some in the low voltage grid, it would be tolerating each other. So both for loading and both for voltage, this would support each other. This is in theory, and we made an analysis of this in practice, particularly for the Köprü area. It was observed that a total of 385 vehicles were charged simultaneously to see the below restrictions in the grid. So if about 25% of them, 94 vehicles were connected to the transformers, this low voltage, both the voltage issues as well as the loads on the transformers would be decreased thanks to this case study. And the details of this are presented in the report. But the vehicle to grid practice, in order to do this, both the vehicles, the grid, and the system should allow this, should be suitable for this practice, which we have to mention. And fast charging on highways was another case analysis. You see a typical scenario that is very close to reality. This is a highway example. There were 72 charging sockets, assuming that 6 stations were fed from the same line with 72 EV charging sockets. And if this 100 kilowatts were used for fast charging, this would be a significant grid voltage. And these are weak lines, generally fed through swallow type lines, and the voltage is inevitable there, high voltage. And there are different options there. Aggregation plans or additional investments could be necessary, but we also need to act in a rational way, particularly during holidays. It's not only to save the day, those extreme investments could be obsolete in the future. So we would need controlled charge. For instance, as an example, we gave one example. 72 vehicles can only charge simultaneously if each draws a maximum of 17 kilowatts. And in this case, the charging time would be extended to 3 hours without any tension or loading. And this is the problem with the highways. You know, people wouldn't want to be stuck on the highways for 3 hours. So an optimum solution would be necessary there. As for the conclusions, without further ado, as I said, the details of the analysis are presented in the report, and we are going to publish them at about 12 o'clock today, noontime. So as a result, even if the annual electricity, we see an integration of 11 million electric vehicles into the grid in Turkey, but this is on top of the existing investments. That is on this brings an additional 12% investment budget. And in this 5 million electric vehicle scenario, that would be an additional investment of 3.5%. In such a case where 11 million EVs are entered into the system, this would mean a 41% decrease in emissions, and about 20 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions will be prevented. And as I said, particularly for petroleum product, fossil fuel product vehicle market, this would be a cleaner energy vehicle transition. So from a fuel standpoint, that will have decreased the performance, capex. There has to be an optimization between the supply continuity and the capex requirement and the capacity factor. The decision makers and the distribution companies and the other stakeholders need to sit down jointly and make a decision together to look at the supply continuity performance indicators and the capex requirements. And smart charging is very critical, as I have mentioned before. It's not only for special days or holidays, but also for the energy need and the market operations. And how can we ensure smart charging? We can do this with dynamic tariffs or multi-tariffs, where different prices are offered. And in the very subsequent times, we can combine automation and dynamic tariffs, and demand aggregators and local flexibility markets can ensure this also. And the V2G, V2G applications, vehicle to grid applications, can benefit from these practices to ensure that the charging and discharging is done at certain times. And of course, in our markets, the dynamic tariff is not much in use, as well as the multi-time tariffs are not used much. And we need to focus on these issues in the upcoming periods. This is my last slide. I don't want to take too much of your time because I want to use my time efficiently. We have identified the priority areas in the transition of the Turkish transportation sector. And you can see these 5 items in detail in the report, but I want to talk about this particularly for the parallel acceleration of the electric vehicle and charging services market. They need to grow in parallel. It's not only about developing the charging infrastructure. So when you develop one and not develop the other, it wouldn't help. So you need to do it in parallel. And the public leadership is important, and incentives are important. And gradually they can be done in the beginning, and then they can be gradually decreased. And the charging infrastructure, also the public's and the private sector's cooperation is going to be important in our opinion. The second important heading is the development of the e-mobility focused distribution grid investment strategies that are necessary. As I mentioned before, capex requirements and reliability criteria need to have an optimum point between the two to balance them. So both the public and the distribution companies, as well as other stakeholders, have a lot to do to meet at a joint stakeholder, joint platform, and a joint denominator, which is very critical. The third item is to develop time and region specific charging measures. I talked about smart charging in order for it to enter our lives and to implement the multi-time grid pricing, which is going to be critical. And in the grids, independent of our markets, the tariffs perhaps they could have multi-time grid pricing. Uh, and region specific, because all regions are different from each other. So region specific charging pricing strategies could enter our lives. And the fourth item would be particularly the development of the implementation and planning of these smart charging mechanisms. What can be done? We studied that, and particularly, for instance, planning the electric vehicle charging infrastructure to be integrated into the grid, to find the suitable locations, that is important, and dissemination of smart technologies to support grid-friendly electric vehicle development and digitalization and automation-related systems will be important. And synergy is very important, creating a synergy between electric vehicle charging, renewable energy integration, and energy storage, and these three systems being considered as integrated with a holistic approach is going to be of critical importance. And finally, we need to evaluate and develop and implement new business models, because for electric vehicle charging, there are new methods, but they are not at the optimum levels desired across the world. And the public could have important supports. And I would like to thank you very much. If you have questions, we can talk during the panel. We can perhaps read it real fast. And Mr. Hassan, thank you very much. Indeed, it was real detailed as a report. And just like Mr. Hassan said, it's going to be published today. The executive summary or the entire report will be presented. I would like to move on to questions. There is a comment from Mr. Batu. This is really an important topic, and an economic modeling study could be useful for on-site generation and storage technologies. And we are looking at the balance. We talked about the balance between capex and performance criteria. Mr. Can Cesar has a question. Is there a specific reason why you took these four regions to base your analysis? I try to talk about this in my presentation. Some of these reasons are developed, some are developing regions. There are two major provinces, Istanbul and Ankara, and some are rural areas. And that's why we chose those four regions for our analysis. In our previous studies, because in the previous years, we also assessed in our study similar regions. There is no specific region, but they need to developed, and rural sections were analyzed, and we chose those criteria to base ourselves. Thank you very much. There is one more question. I don't know how informed we are about this, but what is the current situation about the EU grant loans? Mr. Umut Alkaç asked. I don't know if anyone knows about this, but thank you. We will look at it later. Thanks a lot for this presentation. And now I don't want to, in order to use our time efficiently, I want to move on to the panel. We've got four distinguished experts among us, and they are going to embrace different perspectives. And I would like to introduce them briefly. The first speaker is Ms. Julia Hildermeier. She's from RAP Regulatory Assistance Project, EU project, senior specialist and she's an expert on electromobility and transportation, and she's leading the electric transportation program. And welcome, Julia. The second speaker is Mr. Oğuzcan Samsun. Mr. Oğuzcan is from Enerjisa, Strategy and Business Development Group Manager. Welcome, Mr. Oğuzcan. The third speaker is Mr. Berkay Somalı, Voltrun General Manager and E-Mobility Operators Association board member, and Voltrun is a licensed charging grid operator, network operator. And Mr. Saeed Teimourzadeh, he is the director of EPRA Energy Research and Development. Welcome once again, and thank you for your participation. Before we move on to Turkey, I want to start with global perspective. So with your permission, the first presentation is going to be given to Julia.
Julia, we are already emphasizing that there are some obstacles in transformation to the electricity. And what do you think are the main challenges in development of the EVs in the upcoming years?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's a real pleasure. So first of all, I think globally speaking, in all EV markets, the main challenges for EV uptake are still cheaper, how to get to cheaper upfront prices. But that should be solved soon by market and also by smart purchase incentives. On the grid side, which is the topic of the report we're launching today, the biggest challenge is to build out charging infrastructure and to integrate EVs into distribution grids. And this is the challenge for all global EV markets to a different extent, of course. But it's important that policymakers and stakeholders understand these issues so they can act to help drive electrification of transport in those markets. So let's focus on the charging infrastructure and power grid integration, which is also where RAP comes from, as we always look at EVs both as an asset to the grid and an asset for mobility. Governments need to develop charging infrastructure plans for developing public and private charging infrastructure. Public charging infrastructure, including on-street parking, but also highways, as we showed in the report, private infrastructure, including workplaces, shopping centers, homes, etc. And all of this public and private charging infrastructure needs to be smart so that EVs can use the power grids optimally. And that will help us to reduce the cost of the transition to EVs overall. If I can bring a definition here of this challenge, we can define smart EV charging as charging EVs when it is cheapest for the grid and for the user, without compromising the EV user's needs, of course. And that means users can save money by cheaper charging, but we also save money on the entire system, even for those electricity users that don't drive an EV yet. And that's really important because smart EV charging creates bigger societal benefits. And that helps us to understand that smart charging isn't just a tool for technology nerds. It is really the basis for successful electrification of transport overall in all global markets and, of course, in Turkey. And in other words, if we don't make smart charging the standard for all EV charging, we risk to produce higher costs and eventually to slow down the energy transition, and countries cannot meet their net zero goals. So the main challenges that governments and policymakers have right now regarding EVs are three. First, it's preparing the power grids. It's anticipating where and how much charging will be needed, upgrade the grids where needed, digitalize the grids where needed. And that requires detailed and correct assumptions of where charging will happen and how much charging. and that isn't easy to do. But in the EU, for instance, there is a law that requires network operators to predict, to anticipate EV charging in their network development plans. And that's a start, but it still has to become a little bit more detailed. The second challenge is rolling out the infrastructure with sufficient capacity, but not too much capacity, so we don't add costs to the system, and insufficient density, so at the locations that we need to provide a coherent network for EV users. But it's not just building out the infrastructure, it's also phasing in a market for charging services. In the EU, there is a law that defines that charging at the charging point is selling a service, and that this should be a market-based development. In the beginning, of course, it can make sense to help building out charging infrastructure with public subsidies, but in the mid and long term, this needs to become a functioning market to help consumers make the best choice. And the third challenge is to prepare the energy markets for EV charging. So the energy markets consider EVs as a resource for flexibility that can use the grids optimally, that can provide grid services, and that can help renewable energy. And for all this to happen, we need a coherent policy framework for smart EV charging, and we've given a couple of recommendations for this in the report. But the key ingredients are really planning for EV rollout and pricing. And I'm happy to expand on these later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this extensive answer. You have given us the main challenges and how to overcome them, especially the charging infrastructure and the impact of EVs on the distribution network. We have already indicated those challenges in our report as well, and what policies could be practiced in order to eliminate those challenges. And building on Julia's words, one of the biggest challenges here is about the distribution grid. Julia has mentioned about the importance of planning and digitization. Therefore, the main subject of this report is also about the increased integration of EVs. And on the other hand, we have the heat pumps. Therefore, the burden on the distribution grids will be further increased. Now I would like to turn to Oğuzcan Bey. Oğuzcan Bey, the distribution grids need to have a digital structure and a strong structure. And what subjects do you think are critical in order to achieve this? Thank you very much, Alkım. Julia has given us a very concise summary of the global developments. If we look at Turkey, the first two challenges, preparation of the grid and deciding on the right capacity for infrastructure, are highly difficult problems because you have to combine many trends with distribution. Climate change, EU Green Deal, and the recent developments have once again shown the importance of the supply security. We have the net zero targets for 2053. On the energy side, we have an impact on the current deficit as well. Therefore, decarbonization, digitization, and electrification are the subjects that we discuss a lot. And in order to prepare the grids and provide those capacities, we have to look at the things from a holistic wave. Maybe there will be 4 times increase in solar and 3 times in wind energy. So that means we have to integrate nearly 3 gigawatt solar and 1.5 gigawatt wind into the grid. And for that, we need flexibility and the batteries, and there was a distribution of the licenses around 30 gigawatt. And when we think of their parallel use in terms of infrastructure and the markets, there will be very significant impacts. The heat pumps are also very important. And batteries are also, storage is very important. Maybe the power increase is 3 times higher. So it means we have to prepare ourselves for the future. Our subject is e-mobility. Let me cover that one. In 2023, the number of EVs was only 15,000 and 3,000 sockets were enough, and majority of them were ACs. And today, the number of cars is 100,000, and the total number of sockets is now 17,000. The initiative of the Ministry of Industry was very important. As ESHARJ, we undertook a responsibility for the transformation of infrastructure, especially for e-mobility. Nearly 400 DCs were commissioned very quickly because we believe that there will be further growth. Hakan Bey and Hasan Bey also mentioned about the number of increase by 2035. And of course, there is a need for investment. The grid is already expanding. The average age is 30. The growth is organic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the number of transformers will be increased from 10 to 12, but there will be a change in topology. And as for the next 5 years, we have the tariff period, renewable energy, e-mobility, they all will come to our lives. In Power EU, there is a need for investment around 30 to 50%. And we also looked at the new investment report of National Energy Institute. And that also means 2 times more investment. For only California, there is a need for $50 billion investment for integration of EVs into the grid. So it means the stakeholders have to increase their investment and have to construct more on the fields. It doesn't mean that we should grow what we have, but we should actually be utilizing the technology because the sector is changing, but there is also a change in the need of the customers. There was another important study we conducted with SHURA last year, the digital transformation energy industry. We had a digital transformation project with Eldash, and we find that there are very important opportunities for the distribution companies. So we believe that this transformation can be realized indeed. Thank you very much, Oğuzcan, for this nice wrap up. Considering the targets of Turkey, it doesn't only mean that there is an increased electrification not only in e-mobility but in all the other industries as well. And the grids are the most important subject now. You have mentioned that there is a need for grid investments, and also there is a need for financing in order to reduce the need for investment. We emphasized the importance of smart charging. Now, I'll give the floor to Berkay Bey, and I want to talk about the charging infrastructure with him. The number of EVs is increasing very quickly in Turkey and in other countries, and the charging infrastructure has to follow these. In terms of the EVs advancements and also charging, what challenges do you think are present in Turkey and what needs to be done in order to overcome those challenges? Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that this report by Shura is really very valuable, and I'm sure you have put a lot of efforts into this. It is a report that will be used as a reference for long years, and it actually analyzes the potential problems for infrastructure, and it gives us a very good idea. Thank you for that. The number of EVs is increasing both in Turkey and also across the world. You should have also followed. Recently, there is also a perception like the demand for EVs decreasing and some producers postponing their plans, but in reality, the numbers show that it is not indeed true. Maybe there is a decrease in the trend of increase, but that was already expected. So it just goes in its normal course. Let me give you a few examples that were surprising to me. For example, in April, the sales of EVs went up to 50% for the sedan cars, and that means a very big value for a market selling over 20 million cars. In EU, it is more than 20%, and it is around 10% in our country now. It may look as if we are falling back, but it has made a very huge leap in 2023, and I believe that this trend will go on. As for the charging stations, we have to follow this, and we're actually on the wrong side. Turkey is actually doing pretty well as compared to many other countries. We now have around one charging station per 5 electrical vehicles. That rate is more than 10 in Europe. That means one charging station per 10 EVs. Therefore, we are doing well. So we are ahead of them now. The number of licensed operators is now 200. Not all of them are investing to the same extent, of course, but we can talk about an overall appetite for investment, and we believe that it will continue in the upcoming years. There are some critical subjects for our development. There are some problems that we have to overcome for sure. There are many problems indeed, but I want to talk about the regulation and what steps need to be taken regarding regulation. As the operators, the biggest problems that we have is about the operation permit that we have to obtain from the municipalities. We haven't been able to make a good progress in this regard as the whole industry. As of July, all of the charging stations had to have an operation permit, but I believe it's no more than one per thousand. There are some setbacks. I will not discuss about the details, but we may see the shortcoming in standardization. Every municipality may have different demands. There are also different models. Some mechanisms could be, for example, developed like the construction inspection or the elevator inspection. If that could be turned into a mechanism, then it will be highly beneficial for the industry. And secondly, the smart charging is a huge matter, and there is again a shortcoming of regulation. It is not yet defined in Turkey. It's not defined in detail indeed. For example, if we want to install a station somewhere as an operator, we first obtain the opinion of the electricity distribution company, whether or not there is sufficient capacity there. And in that opinion, so they only ask how much will be the capacity that we will install. For example, I cannot have more than 120 kilowatt in our charging station in a certain area, but we need to increase this capacity based on the demand there. And in the smart charging, we can actually use more capacity than assigned to us. So we can actually use these charging technologies without exceeding the capacity of the grid, and we can actually charge more vehicles with that capacity. But we are not able to do that. I think a definition is needed, and the distribution companies should understand this subject well, and they should train their people and raise an awareness so that smart charging technologies could be put into practice very quickly. Another subject, the licensed operators, there is a price pressure, and all the responsibilities are actually undertaken by the licensed operators. But my personal opinion is that everyone who has a share in this commercial profit should undertake a responsibility. The license providers, or the place that we rent, or the companies we share the income with, are not subject to any regulations now. And in a market with 200 operators, it actually turns to an advantage for them. And that also slows down the investment. And I think that there is a need for a regulation. If they're making a commercial gain here, then they should also be subject to a regulation. The entire responsibility should not be imposed on the operators. I think this is unjust. That's all I could say for now. I'll follow during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berkay. As you said, in Turkey, when it comes to charging infrastructure, this is beyond the development of the electric vehicles. There's an acceleration that exceeds the development of EVs. So Mr. Berkay emphasized the regulation issue. Even though there's a fast development when it comes to regulations, certain improvements need to be made in definitions, in standardization, perhaps in the distribution of responsibilities. This is what we understand. So, under the light of everything that is discussed, we're going to look at the distribution system, we're looking at the global perspective and charging operator perspective. So, to wrap them up, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Saeed. And Mr. Saeed is he was actively instrumental in our study. Mr. Saeed, my question to you is, both in the distribution grids and charging points, you talked about, the other speakers talked about the importance of planning and connecting this to the outcomes of our research. So uh, what are the most important outcomes of our study accordingly? And for the development of EV ecosystem in Turkey, what points do we need to be careful about? So this is our question to you. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for this nice presentation. Our colleagues summarized this real well, both globally and the Turkey-specific issues. And as you said, when you look at it from different perspectives, we see different things, but to solve them simultaneously, we need to identify the certain mechanisms. Back to the study, as a wrap up, what I can say, just like Mr. Berkay said, I want to emphasize, I want to take off from where Mr. Berkay left. He said great things. If a charging point is built, we get permission from the operator. And if there is a capacity, this is allowed. And you build a charging point there. But what we saw in the study is our distribution grids right now, there is not much capacity that we can talk about. Our capacity factor is quite low. In transformers, it's at 40-45%. In mobile lines, it's lower. It's about 20%. So even if we do get the capacity, it is beyond that. There are different factors. And we try to emphasize that in the study. And this factor is the continuity that was in the graph, that was the boxes that show in orange. What do they mean? Let me talk about the technical aspect of this. If there is a load that will connect it needs to be connected from the low voltage. It's going to affect the low voltage grid and then the medium voltage, and it is going to go all the way to the primary system. And if in low voltage, we don't have a problems, and if we don't have the capacity, this permit would be issued and the charging points can be done. But in metropolitan areas, we are given LV sub-transformers or COFAs, as they say. The demand is very high in metropolitan areas. Both the reserves are very full and there are no ports for us to feed. So there will be a need for new transformers. But in the joint transformers, there is still capacity and the annual average is at acceptable levels. But because of the absence of the points, we need a new investment. And on the secondary areas, the transformer numbers increase. And in case of a likely failure, the number of customers will be affected and medium voltage infrastructures and then primaries actually will require more after they reach a saturation point. So our investments and our perspective, it shouldn't be based on capacity, but SAIFI, SAIDI, electricity net supply and continuity needs to be taken into account, because what we are going to emphasize is that this is what we are emphasizing. And this study didn't address that perspective, but with the team, we have reached this point, which gave us this conclusion. And the EV loads characteristics are presented in this outcome. And it's a mobile load because you can charge at charging points or homes, and there are other loads, simultaneous loads. And there needs to be a line that, and there needs to be an infrastructure. But from a technical standpoint, there is a requirement, and this requirement affects the supply process. So in order to ensure a soft transition, we have two paths. Either with investments, we are going to solve this. If we don't have the COFRAs, the bigger transformers, we're going to add new transformers or solve the secondaries. But if you need to make a trade-off. CapEx requirement. In Hassan's presentation, we saw this. And in the regulatory side, certain things need to be allowed, and we need to flex the indicators of the supply process, perhaps, so that the EV loads in this transition phase can be integrated with certain relaxation methods to help us. And this has to be decided by the regulatory authorities and the policymakers. But there are two solutions in front of us: either the CapEx solution or with certain flexibilities and trade-offs. This, how much of these will be solved, how much of them can be relaxed, to what extent they can be relaxed, they can be discussed at workshops. And beyond that, smart charging mechanisms are also there. Perhaps in the second session, this will be discussed. But to wrap up, in our study, these are the highlight issues that I can talk about to ensure the continuity of the supply to review these, and mobility-based mechanisms can be defined with this new perspective. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saeed. Indeed, in our report, actually, one of the most important issues, one of the most important outcomes has been underlined by you. In order to optimize these investments, what can we do when we look at this? The capex need and the supply continuity criteria and a balancing between the performance targets are necessary. This is a reality. And in order to ensure this, both the public and the distribution system operators and the charging operators, all the stakeholders need to work at the same time. And this shows us the importance of planning once again. So, taking from what you said, I would like to move on to Miss Julia to connect it. And when you're answering the first question, Miss Julia, again, in the distribution grid, to reduce the investments and to optimize that, you talked about the importance of smart charging for vehicle users as well as for the entire system. It is the most economic solution. Also, our study showed that. So I will ask you a question about smart charging. Julia, uh, as part of your studies, what are the components of smart charging, and the policymakers, what steps do they need to take to support this?
Thank you, Alkım. And I want to bring I want to summarize our discussion with a few learnings that we have made from comparing global best practices on EV grid integration. And what we can see in all global regions we studied is that there are two main ingredients for getting smart charging right, and these are planning and pricing. On the planning point, it's absolutely crucial to help grid operators develop their networks. Grid operators to prepare for EVs. Grid operators need a long-time planning perspective. They need certainty for their investments, and they need to understand in much detail what type of charging demand can be expected in the local grids. And to get these estimates right, we need energy and transport stakeholders to work together. And I mentioned the network development plans that are required for bigger DSOs, network operators in the EU every 2 years, which are a starting point. These should actually apply to all grid operators from our perspective, and they need input from researchers, from transport stakeholders to make sure that their estimate of EV charging demand is correct. We need detailed projections for passenger EVs, but of course also heavy-duty fleets that are increasingly electrifying and represents bigger loads to the grid. But there are other tools that we can set up, and we're seeing this increasingly across global EV markets. A good tool are public hosting capacity maps. So basically, grid operators publish a map of the grid showing what capacity is available, so that charge point operators and service providers that enter the market have a transparent basis and can decide where to invest and where to develop. And often this is channeled by public authorities through public tenders. So we can make sure that there's charging opportunities available across the entire countries and in rural and urban areas. So hosting capacity maps are a very useful tool to create transparency and help the charging service market to grow. And all of this needs to be part of a government strategy for planning of EV uptake that takes into account both the charging needs of users, but also the capacity and the characteristics of the grid. And these two have to go together at the same time. Otherwise, we're not going to manage the EV transition successfully. So let me get to the second ingredient for for successful smart charging, and that is pricing. Hasan has mentioned it, and other speakers as well. Pricing is really the key signal for consumers to adapt their charging. Pricing needs to be cost reflective of what happens on the grids and of the cost of energy that the EVs charge. And it also needs to be time varying, so consumers know when is the best time to charge and when they can get most value from providing a flexibility service through their EV. And the same actually applies for discharging at the right time, which is nothing else than vehicle to grid. And in our report, we have shown a range of, let's say, smart charging techniques, from simple load management with automation to more sophisticated methods based on time-varying prices and using local price signals. And Saeed can perhaps develop more on this later. But it's very important to make smart charging price-based, because that ensures that consumers get visibility, they get transparency, and they can make a choice according to their needs of how to and when to charge their EVs. And this can be done by consumers, by private consumers, using an app, that they would have once they subscribe to a charging service. But this is also consumers are also fleet managers that optimize the cost of charging their EV fleets. It can be taxi or ride-hailing fleets. It can be commercial fleets. But of course, consumers are also charge point operators who also need to see time-varying pricing, so they can design their business case, their service, based on when is the best time to take electricity from the grid, and then design a price that they pass on to the end consumers, which are the drivers that come by and stop for charging. So basically, time-varying pricing is the key ingredient to optimize EV use or EV charging to the grid in all use cases. To sum up, I think it's essential that EVs can participate in flexibility markets through pricing signals. It's also essential that these price signals are based on the cost of energy and the available capacity in the network, so they signal when is the best time to charge for consumers. And these prices, of course, should be available to private end users, but also to commercial end users. And it's only by introducing this type of pricing, time-varying pricing, and grid optimal planning that we make EV grid integration really centered on the user. And that will help us to reduce the cost for the user, but also for the system, also for the grid, and in the end, also for the environment.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this great wrap up. Julia talked about two important issues. One is planning, as we always emphasize, and the DSOs, we need to give them planning support. This is very important. And also the energy and this transportation industry stakeholders need to plan together. This is of great importance. And the second issue is pricing, we said. And in the report, actually, we are talking about it in detail. The pricing strategy, we talk about this, and the smart charging benefits are going to be helped best by time and region specific variable issues, time specific, time dependent pricing, region specific charging pricing. All of these are going to benefit us. And on the distribution network, distribution grid, let us reduce the load and to minimize the investment need. At this point, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Oğuzcan once again in order to I'm going to ask about the technology and the digitalization and the innovation side because, Enerjisa is one of the leading companies here. And of course, when we're looking at all these needs, when we look at that, we see that innovative approaches and business models need to be developed in the upcoming periods. And in 2022, we had a digitalization report, which was it was addressed in detail. Perhaps I'm going to ask you to summarize it. So, what is going to be the importance of digitalization and innovation in this course? Innovation and digitalization are sine qua non, indispensable for Turkey, even more critical for Turkey, for us, because as Mr. Said emphasized, when you talk about these together, in Europe, it could be 30 minutes, whereas in us, the quantities could differ. And in a structure, when the grid is not strong, just digitalization won't solve this. But this is a very risky area. We need to manage this well with the investment. So digitalization and innovation must be used to solve this knot. Uh, and we have to think of digitalization and innovation as long as they are supported by regulations, we can have it fast. In 6 months, in 3 months, we can talk about innovation. But in order to keep the infrastructure ready, you need years for that. So we need to go proactive. So there's a time factor. We should always remember this. There is a bilateral responsibility. Operational technologies, control systems, SCADAs, we're working, and the geographical information systems on the distribution side are very important. And just like Julia said, these decision mechanisms, the maps, they are going to be the basis for that. And the distribution companies in the global, we have standardization, data quality, predictive maintenance, and they are important. And the more you focus on technology, cybersecurity, we should cybersecurity at all. And this needs to be a holistic structure. And as I said, it's not an electron issue. You're providing an experience to the customer. When the customer looks at it, he can travel to Turkey. So it's not one grid experience. The entire experience is reflected on the industry. So certain solutions need to be common, need to be joined. This is important. And from the mobility aspect, in the past, when you look at the obstacles, in the past, we looked at infrastructure restrictions. This is what 2 years ago studies show. But now, this range right now compared to 2 years ago. And the development in these technologies are important because ranges and charging technologies in parallel, the process is getting faster in charging technologies. But then there are roads, suitable roads, which will develop all together. But once they develop all together, they are going to be integrated with the market. We talked about smart charging, and in the 22 report of SHURA, demand management was very critical. Aggregator was recent effects we saw that, and to be able to manage the load properly, to be able to use the market prices in the best way possible, and to create the right value for the customer, there are huge opportunities. We see the countries with best examples, and we talk to companies for Turkey. Location-based, time-based pricing can be done in this world. So this should be implemented in our country as well. It is possible. But the energy regulatory market is also talking about this, and we are talking about this, the issue of roaming, the integration. And in apartment buildings, the installation of the system is very important. And this is going to be an overall experience. So the audit and inspection of this in the field and the quality parameters need to be done professionally. They need to be set professionally. And as they develop, new business models will be implemented for all of us. And one more thing, using these technologies all together, we keep talking about batteries, but batteries, renewables, off-grid solutions are in our lives. And we're working on this as Enerjisa. We have these in our portfolio. And they give this they help the customers as internal solutions to manage the market flexibilities properly, because using technology and using digitalization, this is a flexibility, and digitalization is critical. But let me talk about innovation briefly. When you look at the global innovation, when financing goes down, investments are they go down or they remain flat. But when it comes to e-mobility or clean energy, the investments and the supports on innovation are increasing, which is good news. And NAR, that is our internal program, and acceleration, open innovation programs, all focuses are managed, and our colleagues are directed on batteries, joint use, e-mobility, creating the market models, decarbonization. These are our main focus points. And Mr. Berkay, I will talk about this. This topic is very exciting, and there are ideas and there are practices which we see in the market. But sustainability is very important, and in the industry, we need to offer this to the customers with the right service quality. And the players in the sector, both legal responsibilities and operation responsibilities, they need to be managed together. And perhaps the industry right now, there is a 200 license, it's a widespread common, but in the upcoming periods it needs to be more focused, more integrated, and more focused and consolidated. We expect the evolution as we see in fuel oil or in other industries.
Thank you very much, Oğuzcan. As you said, there is a very quick progress in the innovation side, and on the other hand, the distribution grid takes more time to realize them. And you talked about the limitations about the distance and charging opportunities. I'll give the floor to Berkay Bey again. This is a highly disputed subject in Turkey as well. The new technologies and fast charging. What are the developments about fast charging in Turkey? And is there still a lot more that the sector has to do regarding fast charging? Thank you. Well, fast charging technology is developing very fast, as the name suggests. I had an experience abroad in the recent months. Let me tell you about that. A car that is not yet sold in Turkey was charged with 450 kilowatts, and in less than 10 minutes, the battery went from 6% to 80%. And that was a very good experience for me too. And we started a similar one in Ataşehir for test purposes. And in our tests, we were able to charge with 300 kilowatts and above. If we should compare, the current charging capacity is around 150 in Turkey, and that means 2 times or even 3 times faster charging, and it means feeling like an experience of fuel oil, and even megawatt charging is now being discussed, and there are some pilot practices as well, and they are mostly for the heavy vehicles for logistic purposes, for charging of the transportation companies. The charging technologies are able to support them already, and the batteries of the cars are the main determinants here. It's about their speed of charging. Many cars are equipped with 400-volt charging technology. Some new models are moving to 800-volt architecture, and the car that I experienced had 800-volt architecture. The 800-volt architecture is very important to us because it means being able to charge very fast, and also because it is a more intense battery technology, it can further improve the distance, the range. And we believe that majority of the cars will move to 800-volt technology, and it will be a very huge leap for the market. It's not very easy to achieve those speeds. It brings together a burden on the distribution, and it requires a different perspective indeed in order to install charging stations with such speeds, and they turn into something like fuel oil stations. There are examples in EU, in China. There are now creating structures to charge 100 cars or 200 cars at once, and new charging hubs are also being created on the highways. On some certain routes they are located, and even in some critical city centers we can see them now. On the distribution and transmission side, there is a very huge burden on the highways in some certain areas. The distribution centers for charging stations need to be set up maybe through the state, and they should be open to all the licensed operators so that they can set up their stations in such locations more easily. Otherwise, we have to bring the electricity from very long distances, and instead of a single operator doing it on his own, the support of the state is needed so that it will be more effective. Of course, it will not be possible to do that everywhere. We cannot really create a distribution center everywhere, and we cannot expect the state to do the same everywhere. The charging stations with energy storage facility will help us, especially in the recent years. There has been a decrease, and in the charging, when it is combined with solar, we believe we can make a good progress. In the upcoming years, it will be an important subject for us, especially for the places where infrastructure is not strong enough or where it is costly to bring there. The charging stations with energy storage facilities will be installed. Fast charging is very popular nowadays. Everyone is asking for a fast charging, but I believe we should also inform the market, because you don't really need fast charging everywhere, especially in our workplace, in our common destinations. We don't really need such fast charging stations, but the perception of the market is, especially when the operators speak to the owners, they say they want fast charging, but in terms of the market segmentation, no fast charging is actually needed there. We know that, and we're trying to explain it to them. So fast charge doesn't necessarily mean better charge. We have to inform the people because that actually means an unnecessary additional burden on the grid, and it will mean inefficient use of the capacity. If we do not really need fast charging, then we don't need to place a fast charging station, or maybe we can have a system that will serve more cars at one time. Otherwise, it comes with some certain losses. Thank you very much, Berkay. That was an important point. We do not really need fast charging everywhere. It may not be needed for the workplaces and for house type charging. So you have reminded us that there will be a big burden on the distribution network. And you also have mentioned the need for charging stations with energy storage facilities on the highways, and we actually studied that in our report as well. I will give the floor to Saeed as the expert. Maybe he wants to build on what you have said. We have also discussed a lot about the benefits of smart charging. And what do you think could be done in Turkey in this regard? Do you like to add anything? So I will ask you to wrap up the subject this way. Thank you very much. I have learned a lot, especially from Oğuzcan. As you said, smart charging and controlled charging is useful. We will not discuss about that indeed, but it is important to understand what is smart. There is a motto that is known when we say smart charging, the users should be smart, but not the grid. The end user should also be smart, and for them to be smart, the awareness is highly important. So this is the motto. How could this awareness be raised? For example, I have developed a smart charging. We have our tariffs hourly and regionally. Will the user know about this? Or how could the user forecast that if I charge like 3 hours later, instead of now, I will charge for cheaper? Or I should charge in this region, but not in this one. What is the congestion there? The user will not know. And therefore, an awareness raising mechanism should be set up. It is not easy to do that because there is a high number of users. And for that, the demand response mechanisms should be put forth, and they should think how to shift the demand to another hour and how to raise the awareness of the users. This is the first thing that needs to be studied. The mechanisms are known. So, like you will use another place for charging, there will be hourly tariffs, but the user has to know how to utilize them. So, keyword is awareness here, actually. After the awareness is raised, the hourly mechanisms will enable low cost of charging. It will also decrease the congestion of the grid. On the other hand, some problems cannot be resolved with such solutions. You have mentioned the issue about the highways. Maybe on the highways, it might be a religious festival and everyone is at a certain point and they have to charge. There might be simultaneous charging. 72 sockets can be supplied through one line. And if there is this charging at the same time, then there will be problems with the voltage, but not with the capacity. We always speak about capacity, but capacity is not the keyword. It is about the supply quality. And in that case, the time will be extended. So automation and local solutions are needed. So smart solutions are on one hand. And if the smart solutions are not sufficient, then we need local solutions. There is a similar practice in the States, for example. If there is a charging of the same, a certain number of cars at the same time, then the power is decreased. So time increases. So some local solutions should be added. So hourly and dynamic charging and local automation solutions are easy things to do. With a change of the regulations, that could be done. And in order to go beyond, for example, we may have EVs everywhere, the charging stations have been created and investments have been made, then it will come to another point and you will have to come up with another solution. There are again different mechanisms. Hasan Bey mentioned about local flexible markets. So the infrastructure must be ready and locational and time-based tariffs need to be created. And then you will have the awareness and there will be stakeholders of the users and they will have their infrastructure and then B2G mechanisms could be created. If I should make a hierarchy of the solutions, I think the first and easy solution is the local automations, then hourly and regional tariffs, then local flexibility markets, then advanced mechanisms like B2G. So if we can do that, then we can integrate the EVs into our grid very easily. I believe they will come. The world is also working on them. Hopefully, we will see that all together in Turkey as well. We talked about it at once and offered some solutions. Thank you very much. Before I conclude, I would like to thank our technical team for their efforts, and I want to thank the management for giving us this opportunity. I want to thank Shura team, RAP team, and the dear panelists. Thank you very much, Saeed Bey. We have already gone beyond our time. It is the lunch time, and majority of the participants are still with us. I want to thank them. You have mentioned about the dynamic tariffs and B2G. Another subject that we have not discussed is about how to increase the awareness of the users, and it will be another matter. I want to check the questions. I can see one question I can ask you. Batuvaluk is asking, the speakers have mostly talked about the technical part of the subject, and I want to ask whether or not the competence or training of the people working in the field is sufficient. Let me answer this question very quickly. Your right. Energy is highly dangerous and it is open to occupational accidents. Therefore, occupational health and safety is indispensable to us, and it is on the field for e-mobility, like distribution and transmission, because e-mobility needs to be grown very quickly, and this is a highly important subject for the regulator as well. As for the technical competence within the sector, there are already players investing on this field, and there are also companies who are developing their own talents, and the intensity of technology will be further increased, and we need to have the same on the talent side as well. Part of them will be trained by us, but maybe part of them will be taken from other sectors. So I think this is another challenge for this sector. Thank you very much. There is another question. Maybe Hassan or Saeed could answer. In our study, you consider the increase of population locally. Actually, I have answered this in written. Let me briefly summarize. In net zero study, we developed a demand projection and we took the population into consideration, how it will increase by the year 2053. And while distributing the population to the rural and the metropolitan areas, we did not carry out any study on the population directly. But because we are considering the population in net zero, we are already distributing the same in our study. Thank you very much. We have gone beyond our time. Thank you all for your kind attention. And I would like to thank the distinguished panelists. And also, I want to thank the entire SHURA team for their efforts in creation of this report. We have underlined very important points in today's webinar. Hopefully, this report and this event will help taking the strategic steps to further improve EVs in our country. Thank you very much for your kind attention and have a great day ahead.